rabbinic structures. Today, in a special edition, we are going to speak about the history of the Jewish community of Serbia, the placing of itself, and the rabbinic structure over there. Special edition over here. Many years, it was part of the old Yugoslavia, and let's explore a bit with regards to the Jewish history there in of itself. I think it's more goes back around 2,000 years, the Serbian Jewish community. I think even by the Roman times, that's when the Jewish people will first come to Serbia at that stage in time. Now, the Jewish communities of the Balkans, let's just say, remained small really until the later part of the 15th century, when the Jewish communities were fleeing, let's say, from Spain and the Portuguese Inquisitions, and they would find refuge in Ottoman-ruled areas, including Serbia. The community originally flourished and reached a peak of 33,000, of whom almost 90% were living in Belgrade and Vojvodina. I think before the Second World War this was. About 2/3 of Serbian Jews, unfortunately, was murdered in the Holocaust. After the war, most of the remaining Jewish people of Serbia population emigrated, mainly to Israel. In 2022, I think there was a census, there was only 709 people declared themselves Jewish at that stage in time. Now, the Jews, as we said before, first arrived in the territory, obviously present-day Serbia, in Roman times, and there's little documentation with regards to this before the 10th century. Now, Ottoman rule time period, the Jewish communities of the Balkans were, let's say, boosted, especially in the 15th and 16th centuries, by the arrival of Jewish refugees fleeing Spanish and Portuguese Inquisitions. I think at that point in time, there was Sultan Bayezid II of the Ottoman Empire would welcome the Jewish refugees into his empire. Jews would become involved with trade, various provinces respectively, in the Ottoman Empire, becoming especially important, especially in the salt trade. I think come on 1663, the Jewish population of Belgrade was 800, while the rest of modern-day Serbia was still ruled by the Ottoman Empire. Territory of present-day Vojvodina, I think, was part of the Habsburg monarchy. In 1782, Emperor Joseph II issued the Edict of Tolerance, giving Jews some measures of religious freedoms. At that point in time, the edict would attract Jews to many parts of the monarchy, and the Jewish communities would then flourish, especially in the Vojvodina area in of itself. And by 19th century, the end of it, the region had nearly 40 Jewish communities. The Principality of Serbia. Many Jews were involved in the Serbian Revolution by, let's say, supplying arms to local Serbs. The Jewish communities faced brutal reprisal attacks from the Ottoman Turks at that point in time. I think it's reported over in 1804 there was Karadorad's forces. They invaded the Ottoman fortress of Smederevo, and the Jewish people were expelled from Sabak and Pozarevac. After Belgrade was then liberated, I think the Jews fell victim to decades of discrimination, taxes, and residential restrictions. During the liberation of Belgrade, contrary to, let's say, the strict orders issued by Serb leader Karađorđe, I think some of the rebels destroyed Jewish shops and synagogues, as reported at that point in time, and many of them were forced into baptizing. And I think Serb rebels expelled Jews from towns and small places. So you see, there was anti-Semitism all throughout in Serbia, all throughout the old hundreds of years. 1830 would see Serbia grant autonomy with the Ottoman Empire. I think there was a reclamation of the Serbian throne by the House of Obrenović and Milos Obrenović in 1858. Restrictions on Jewish merchants were again relaxed for some time, but only 3 years later faced isolation and humiliation. In 1861, the Milos Obrenović inherited the throne and reinstated anti-Jewish restrictions. In 1839, Jews were forbidden to open shops on Sundays. In 1839, Jews were forbidden to open shops on Sundays and during Serbian holidays, causing obviously damage to their shops. Obviously, they were closed on Shabbat and on all Jewish holidays. So for them to be closed on Sundays also would be highly problematic. I think in 1877 there was a parliamentary election and the Jewish candidate was elected to the National Assembly for the first time after receiving backing of all the parties. 1860s, 1870s, I think Serbian newspapers began publishing anti-Jewish articles that resulted in threats being raised against the Jewish people. In 1862, I believe a fight would break out between Austrians and Serbians, and Jews in Belgrade had their rights revoked, obviously similar to uprisings, I think, in 1840s. But during the final stages of 1877 and 1878, Serbo-Ottoman wars, thousands of Jews emigrated and were expelled by the advancing, let's say, armed forces of the Principality of Serbia, along with Turks and Albanian families, respectively. The Kingdom of Serbia. 1879, there was Serbian Jewish Singer Society, was founded in Belgrade to encourage Serbian Jewish interaction and friendship. The First and Second World War, I think this specific choir was not allowed to perform. Obviously, anti-Semitism also. It was renamed the Baruch Brothers Choir in 1950, and I think it's one of the oldest Jewish choirs in the world in existence. The choir, I think, is still a symbol today of community unification. Although 20% of the choir members are actually Jewish due to the dwindling Jewish population in the country. I think by 1912, the Jewish community of Kingdom of Serbia stood at 5,000. There was, at that point in time, as you can see, many things actually occurred at that point in time. Serbian-Jewish relations reached a high degree of cooperation, I think, during the First World War, when Jews and Serbs fought side by side against Central Powers. Some 132 Jews died in the Balkan Wars and World War I, and in their honor, a monument to them was erected in Belgrade at the Jewish Sephardic Cemetery. I think Jews in modern-day North Macedonia got their full citizen rights for the first time when the region became part of the Kingdom of Serbia. I think, obviously, in the aftermath of the First World War, Montenegro, Banat, Bačka, Simra, and Vojvodina joined Serbia through popular vote in those regions, and soon afterwards, this enlarged, let's say, Serbia, united with states of the Slovenes, the Croats, and the Serbs at that point in time to form, let's say, the Kingdom of Serbs, the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, over there respectively. So much is history within regards to that. The Kingdom of Yugoslavia will maintain neutrality during this period preceding the Second World War. And let's just say, obviously at that point, they tried to actively woo Adolf Hitler while maintaining the alliance with the former Entente powers, UK and France, and notwithstanding overtures, let's say, to Germany, Yugoslav policy was not anti-Semitic. For instance, Yugoslavia opened its borders to Austrian Jews following the Anschluss over there. There was very high pressure to yield to German demands for safe passage of its troops to Greece. Yugoslavia signed a tripartite pact with Germany and Italy, like Bulgaria and Hungary. Unlike the other two, the signatory government of Maček and Kvedković was overthrown 3 days later in a British-supported coup with patriotic anti-German generals. The new government immediately, at that point in time, would rescind the Yugoslav signature on the pact for strict neutrality, and the German response was unfortunately brutal. Belgrade was bombed without the declaration of the war on the 6th of April 1941, and German, Italian, Hungarian, and Bulgarian troops invaded Yugoslavia at that point in time. By the time, let's say, Serbia and Yugoslavia were liberated, all this occurred at that point in time. Huge, unfortunately, loss among the Jewish community. I think by 1944, most of Serbian Jewry, unfortunately, was murdered. Of the 82,500 the Jews of Yugoslavia alive in 1941, only 14,000, 17%, survived the Holocaust. Of the Jewish population of 16,000 in the territory controlled by Nazi puppet government of Milan Nedic, police and secret services murdered approximately 14,500 people. That's also, but there were Serbian civilians that was involved in saving thousands of Yugoslav Jews during the period. I think as of 2022, Yad Vashem recognizes 139 Serbians as righteous among the nations, the highest number among Balkan countries, which we also have to point out. According to Yad Vashem, the Chetniks initially had an ambivalent attitude towards the Jews, and given their status in the war as resistance, let's say, movement against Nazi occupation, a number of Jews served among the Chetnik ranks at that stage in time. So much more can be stated with regards to that. And the there was Jewish Chetniks, I think, that would switch to partisan ranks at that point in time. So more can be stated. Then we could speak a bit about the socialist Yugoslavia, which will affect the Jewish community also. I think the Federation of Jewish Communities in Yugoslavia was formed in the aftermath of the Second World War to coordinate the Jewish communities of post-war Yugoslavia and to lobby for the right of Jews to immigrate to Israel. More than half of Yugoslav survivors chose to immigrate to Israel after the Second World War. There was a breakup of Yugoslavia. Approximately, that was in the 1990s, approximately 2,500 Jews lived in Serbia, mostly in Belgrade. The Jews of Serbia lived peacefully in Yugoslavia between World War II and the 1990s. When the breakup of Yugoslavia and ensuing civil wars occurred, I think in 1953 the Jewish population of Serbia was 1,504. It would decrease in 1981 all the way to 683. 1991 it would increase again to 1,107. Again, I think when we exclude the Kosovo statistics, in 2022 there was only 709 community members over there. I think that was a more recent, let's say, in its own right survey. We're going to speak about the rabbis of Serbia soon. We'll just speak about maybe some of the famous writers, let's just say, in the academic field. For example, many people would, I think David Albala was a famous Jewish community leader in Serbia. There was poets over there, Oskar Davico, for example. There was Philip David, who was a playwright, columnist, and various other people that we can see. But we're here to really speak about the Jewish history and the rabbinic history of Belgrade. So that was just as a side note. We're going to speak about the synagogues towards the end of this video, but I want to say something just about the Belgrade synagogue just for a moment over here. It's also known as Belgrade synagogue is one of the famous synagogues of Serbia. It's also known as Sukat Shalom synagogue over there. Obviously, it's an Orthodox synagogue located in central Belgrade. It's in the square and central high street of Knez Mihajlović in Serbia, respectively. I think also known as Sukat Shalom. It was, I think, come on April 2013, 12 years ago, just over 12 years ago. It was known as a cultural monument. It was actually named over there. And obviously a lot of rich heritage. Obviously we know in the 1500s, Sephardic Jews would begin to settle in larger numbers in Serbia. And in 1567, 1573, there was already at that point in time several Jewish congregations and 3 synagogues. During the 17th century, the Jewish community, let's say settlers in the Dunaj riverfront, such as Jelice, the life of the Jews began to improve. Let's say after Serbia was set on the path of independence in the first half of the 19th century and was granted equal civil rights after the Congress of Berlin. Now there'll be a settlement of Ashkenazi Jews also in Belgrade. That will come really in the 18th century, let's just say in itself. But the community considerably grew in the mid-19th century and in the first half of the 20th century. On the 1st of October 1869, a separate Ashkenazi community was founded at that point in time. And the rule of Ashkenazi Jewish congregation, let's just say, was laid down in 20 articles, which, among other things, envisaged the founding of a school and a place of worship. Its approval by the city administration laid the formal groundwork for the new Ashkenazi community. First, the community, they would rent a building in Kosmajsk, more present-day Marcela Bidruzova, a street for its religious, administrative, cultural, and other needs. It was fundraising to support the construction of a purpose-built, more functional building began on the eve of the First World War at that point in time. But the cornerstone, I think, with a charter on parchment signed by King Alexander and Queen Maria was sealed with it, and it was solemnly laid only after the war, I think on the 15th of June 1924. That was over there at that point in time. And this was a famous ceremony, was attended by envoys of the king and the government of the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats and Slovenes, the representatives of the Jewish congregations of various corporations. The president of the National Assembly was a chief rabbi named Rabbi Dr. Alkalai, who we're going to speak about in due course. We're going to go through the different great rabbis over there of the place in of itself. So it's actually interesting just to... So we know that Belgrade will actually date back really to the 16th century when it was under Ottoman rule. It's actually interesting. Initially, obviously, it was a very strong area of Jewish Ladino-speaking Sephardic community, which mostly, let's say, settled at that point in time in the central Belgrade neighborhood called Dorko. Obviously, we know that the city's Ashkenazi Jews, many of them were from Central Europe, and nearby Austria-Hungary, mostly lived in Serbia, in the area where the current active synagogue stands. The Jewish community in Belgrade flourished, most notably in the 17th century, when Belgrade had a yeshiva. In numerous community and cultural centers, Jewish charitable organizations, societies, and shops. A beautiful early 20th century Sephardic synagogue, then one of the most prominent buildings in the city, stood in today's Kara Arusa Street. Over here. You can see the rich culture there was. Just a culture. As another tidbit, before the Second World War, there was about 12,000 Jews that lived in Belgrade at that stage in time. 80% were, at that stage in time, Spanish, Ladino-speaking Sephardim. 20% were Yiddish-speaking Ashkenazim. Most of the Jewish population of Serbia was exterminated, as I said before, during, unfortunately, the World War in itself. And, it was just devastating. I think there were 3 concentration camps for Jews. There were Serbs and Gypsies in the city at the time. Most Jewish men, unfortunately, perished at the Otto Commando site near the city centre, apart from those killed in Banjica camp. And the camp of Sajmist was on the independent state of Croatia, let's just say. Wartime bombing destroyed most of the Jewish monuments, as well as most of the Jewish monuments in the city over there. So we have to point that out also. Now let's speak about another synagogue, famous synagogue. We're going to speak more about the synagogue soon. There's also the famous Novi Sad synagogue, which was also, I think it was completed in 1909. And it was until 1966. And then I think since 2012, it's been used as a cultural research center. I think that would have 900 people praying inside the synagogue. It was known as one of the largest synagogues in Central Europe. This was an Ashkenazic synagogue, though. I think it was located on the famous Javriska Jewish street in the place. Also, that's just as another side fact that we've got to point out with regards to this synagogue. Now, one of the most famous rabbis from Serbia, who we have to point out, is a great rabbi named Rabbi Isaac Abraham Alcala. He was born in November the 11th, not 1881. He passed away on December 29th, 1978. He was actually a Bulgarian-born Jew who would serve as the chief rabbi of Serbia and Yugoslavia, and he would also lead the American Sephardic Jewish community over there. So he would study, actually famously, in the Vienna Rabbinical Seminary, and was a graduate of the University of Vienna in 1908. In 1909, he was appointed chief rabbi of Belgrade and of Serbia. He served as an emissary of the Serbian government from 1915 to 1918, visiting America on a mission in 1918 on behalf of the Serbian Jews, and writing about the Serbian Jews in America Jewish Year. He founded the Rabbinical Federation of Yugoslavia in 1923, serving as its first president and helping edit its annual Jebreschiki Almana. In 1923, King Alexander I appointed him the chief rabbi of Yugoslavia. He attended the first Sephardi Congress in 1925. Well, I think at that point in time, he would be then elected, I think, in around that point in time, as vice president of the World Sephardi Federation. In the years prior to the Holocaust, he was central and unifying figure of Yugoslav Jewry. And I think it was come 1928, he published a study of Jews through the Balkans, and in the late 19th century and early 20th century, and he would receive the order of the Saint Sava. This was in 1921, so it got a lot of accolades from a Serbian point of view, from a let's just say from a governmental point of view. But I think in 1932, King Alexander I appointed him to the Senate of Yugoslavia, making him the only Jewish member of the Parliament of Yugoslavia. He wasn't reappointed in 1938, when obviously there was anti-Semitic, let's say, sentiments was rising in Yugoslavia. Obviously that was due to the funding from Nazi Germany, leaving Yugoslavian Jews without any representation in the parliament. He was a chaplain in the Serbian army during the Balkan Wars, and at one point president of the Yugoslavian Red Cross. He also wrote several research studies on the history of Jews in Serbia. In 1941, the day of the Germans' bombing in Belgrade, Alkali left Belgrade with his wife and daughter and began escaping Yugoslavia on foot. There was, I think, various different false reports that first he was killed through the bombings. I think, unfortunately, I think his son-in-law was reportedly captured by the Nazis. He was hunted down by the Gestapo in Yugoslavia. And at one point, he would hide in a cellar with his daughter. Told Gestapo agents that no one was in the house. The Breslau radio reportedly singled him out for attack, promising listeners he would be captured. He managed to escape capture and made his way to Sofia, Bulgaria, only for the pro-Nazi Bulgarian government under King Boris III to find out about the arrival and order him to leave within 24 hours. He was able to stay longer for health reasons and later made his way to Istanbul in Turkey. From there, he made his way to the land of Israel, where he was welcomed by the entire Yishuv for his support of Zionism and for the, let's just say, being the great nephew of the famous Rabbi Yehuda Alkali, who we're going to speak about also in a few minutes here in this show. The famous rabbi, obviously, he was preached political Zionism decades before Theodor Herzl did, and we're going to speak about him in due course, obviously. While in Palestine, he recovered from his journey and made arrangements with Jewish agent leaders, especially heads of Sephardic community, to render aid to Yugoslavia. He then travelled to America in a roundabout journey via West Africa and South America, arriving in the country by July 1942. He would arrive in America. He was settled in New York City, in New York, and became a representative of the Yugoslav government in exile. In 1945, he helped organize the Central Sephardic Jewish Community of America, serving as its leader, chief rabbi of all Sephardic Jews in New York City, and spiritual head of all the Sephardic communities in the United States. Until his leadership, the Sephardic community in America went from, let's say, some scattered and stagnating congregations into a more unified and mainstream community. Involved in the founding of the World Jewish Congress, let's just say at that point in time, in 1936, he promoted its work on behalf of persecuted European Jewry before, during and after World War II and the Holocaust. He was a board member of the American Joint Distribution Committee, also the B'nai B'rith, the New York Board of Rabbis. He also founded the Sephardic Home for the Aged in Brooklyn. He retired as a chief rabbi in 1968, and in 1970, Yeshiva University gave him a medal. In 1971, the Association of Yugoslav Jews in the United States of America issued a souvenir journal in honor of his 90th birthday. In 1910, Rabbi Alkali married, I think, Jelena Schaefer in Vienna. They had one daughter, Naomi, who established a chief rabbi, Dr. Isaac Abraham, and Jelena Alkali, chair in Sephardic studies at Yeshiva University's Bernard Rebel Graduate School of Jewish Studies in 2009. They passed away in the Sephardic home on December 29th in 1978. We're talking about just nearly 47 years ago here from time recording. So we can see he was arguably one of the more recent famous Serbian rabbis. We're going to speak more about that also, but all throughout the time period, Jewish religious life in Serbia, I think even now currently, let's just talk about currently, it's still active, and there's synagogues now in modern day in Belgrade and Subotica. I think these synagogues currently are run under the auspices of the Federation of Jewish Communities of Serbia, and I think currently Rabbi Yitzhak Asiel will currently serve as country's chief rabbi. We're going to speak about him in a minute. The Belgrade synagogue, I think Sukkot Shalom is, it's actually interesting. Most of the people that I think are Ashkenazic that actually pray there, but I think it follows the Sephardic Nusach, the prayer liturgy. Obviously, it's an Orthodox synagogue, and the congregation in Subotica will follow the Ashkenazi prayer version. Interesting enough, I think currently there's no Jewish day schools in Serbia, and the Federation of Jewish Communities of Serbia offers a number of Jewish educational programs. For example, the Belgrade Jewish Community runs a Talmud Torah program that teaches Hebrew and other aspects of Jewish life. In the Novi Sad and Subotica Jewish communities, classes and programs of informal Jewish education are available to Jewish children of various ages. These communities also offer Hebrew languages classes for adults. Now, these Jewish youth groups, I think, are particularly active within major Serbian Jewish communities through the Federation, including the Serbian Union of Jewish Studies, a cross-communal, peer-led organization that caters to the interests of Jewish students. also offers recreational atmosphere that emphasizes Jewish values and the importance of Zionism while keeping strong ties with similar organizations from other parts of Yugoslavia. Now, currently, as we said before, Rabbi Isaac Asiel is the head of the Federation of Jewish Communities in Serbia and Belgrade. And it's actually interesting, just another side fact, Rabbi Yoshua Kamenetsky leads the Chabad Lubavitch synagogue in Belgrade, I think, which caters more to the Israeli community and its visitors. Now, Rabbi Yitzhak Asiel, I think, interesting enough, he's been the rabbi, I think, since March 1995. We're talking about 30 years and 7 months from present, for our time of recording here in September 2025. I think he received education in Belgrade University in the Faculty of Anthropology, Bachelor of Arts. He got a BA, a doctoral program it was. Also in University of Belgrade with the Faculty of Sociology. So he's very academically well-bred. Also, I believe he would study his rabbinic studies in the famous Yeshivat Har Etzion in Gush Etzion in Alon Shvut, a place we visited on this channel before, which we have to point out. So he's the current rabbi with a great pedigree of academic and religious orientation also. So that's, and he's been serving there as a long time. Okay, so let's speak about the famous Rabbi Yehuda Alkalai, who was, he would become a great rabbi in Serbia. He was actually also in Bosnia, also a rabbi. He was born in 1798 and passed away, I believe, in October 1878. He was one of the influential, let's say, precursors of modern Zionism, along with another rabbi, Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Kalischer. I think he was an Ashkenazic rabbi, the latter was. He was a Sephardic Jew. He also played an important role in the process of widely attributed to the Ashkenazic Jewish community. Rabbi Alkalai became noted through his advocacy in favor of the restoration of the Jews to the land of Israel. By reasons of some of his projects, he may justly be regarded as one of the precursors of the modern Zionists, such as Theodor Herzl. Obviously, he was born in Sarajevo, which was part of the Ottoman Empire. He would actually pass away in Jerusalem. I believe he was buried in Har Zaytim. And it's actually interesting that the family was a Spanish from origin also. He would study in Jerusalem, and which obviously belonged at that point to Ottoman Turkish Empire, under great rabbis that was under influence of the great Kabbalah. In 1825, he would become a teacher at the Sephardic community of Semlin, which is, and then it's rabbi a few years later. Semlin, I think it's today's Zemun district, was Serbian capital of Belgrade. So you can see, he was really one of the great rabbis of Belgrade. I think was at that point of time, the Austrian Empire's military frontier. At that time, the time of Rabbi Alkalai's arrival, the region was experiencing strong nationalistic movements. And the Serbian War of Independence, which led to the creation of a new Serbian state after centuries of Ottoman, gave impetus to new nationalistic ideas among Balkan Jews, such as Rabbi Alkalai over there. And 1852 we see Rabbi Alkalai establish the Society of the Settlement of the Land of Israel in London. 1871, Rabbi Alkalai would visit Jerusalem and establish another short-lived colonization society. In 1874, at the age of 76, he moved there with his wife. He died in 1878, days after native Bosnia was occupied by the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and was buried in the ancient Mount of Olives Jewish cemetery over there. So it's actually interesting. We have to point out he was an influencer actually on Theodor Herzl. It's actually interesting. Theodor Herzl's paternal grandfather was someone named Simon Loeb Herzl, and he would attend Rabbi Alkalai's synagogue in Semlin, and the two frequently visited. And the grandfather, Simon Loeb Herzl, had his hands on one of the first copies of Rabbi Alkalai's 1857 work, prescribing the return of the Jews to the Holy Land and renewed glory of Jerusalem. Contemporary scholars conclude that Herzl's own implementation of modern Zionism was undoubtedly influenced by that relationship over there. Now it's interesting, Rabbi Alkalai's view of Jewish return to the land of Israel was a religious one. He really wanted a religious state. He maintained, based on an ample body of religious literature, that the coming of Moshiach and divine redemption of the Jewish people required their return to the promised land. His Kabbalistic view made him specifically assert that the year 1840 was the year of redemption, which was not a single year, but a century from the day until 1939, representing the days of Messiah. Unless powerful practical steps were taken, this opportunity would be lost. And the next extended year, starting in 1940, would be one of great hardship when, with an outpouring of wrath, we'll gather our dispersed. We saw what happened, the Second World War at that point in time. The outcome, the return to the Promised Land, would be the same, but under much harsher circumstances. And much can be said within regards to that. Let's just speak about a bit. So he was a great rabbi over there. And I think this, now just going back to the synagogues at the moment, the Subotica synagogue, we spoke about it just before. I think it's, according to many people, it's the second largest synagogue in Europe, and one of the only synagogues designed, I think, in the Hungarian Art Nouveau style left in existence. This famous synagogue. This is located in the northern part of Serbia, and the synagogue was completed in 1902. Just to add on to it, I think it would serve the Serbian Neo-Lodge community that is today considered a monument of exceptional importance, and it's protected by the national government. For many years, the synagogue was neglected, and just, I think, in 2018, it was fully renovated, which I had to point out. Now, going back to the Spanish culture in Serbia and the richness within regards to that's the diversity of culture. I think some of it is there was a band called the Shira or Tfila. I think it was a band in Serbia, I think in this region and in the whole of Europe, that nurtures a culture of Sephardic music. I'm not too sure if it's a religious band or not so much, but that's what I see written. I think this music band brings together multi-ethnic, multi-faith ensemble that draws its inspiration from the diversity and richness of Judeo, Spanish, Ottoman, Turkish, Arabic and Balkan music traditions. Another interesting fact with regards to the history of Serbia, there's a famous Belgrade Purim. What is that, friends, over here? That's another interesting fact. The first Jewish community building in Belgrade was erected in 1860 in an area called Dorkol in Solinska Street. It was a famous old home of the Milda. Milda was also the school building where during the Turkish bombardments in 1862 a miracle occurred and the whole community found shelter and miraculously survived the bombing of the city. There were shots and whistles on all sides. An artillery shell hit the building but became lodged in the roof and failed to explode. This event is well known as the Belgrade Purim. So that is also very, very interesting. So just a few more interesting tidbits within regards to Belgrade in itself of a history. There's a famous Gezakon, was a bookshop. Also, just to add on as another tidbit, it was established a bookselling and publishing business in Belgrade, which should also be the largest one in Yugoslavia. I think from his premises in Belgrade, he would establish over 3,500 books before his business was closed in 1941 during the Second World War with the Axis invasion of Yugoslavia. Now, Mr. Kon, Geka Kon, was born in Kuzgarand in Hungary. His father was a rabbi and was the director of the elementary school. Unable to complete school, Kon would move to Belgrade in 1889. In Belgrade, he found work in a bookshop owned by Frederick Breslau. From there, he continued his own career, and I think it's interesting. Today, I think this bookstore still carries the name of Geka Kon and is located in the main street of Belgrade. So that's another famous, interesting tidbit in regards to heritage and the history of Serbia, different happenings going on in Serbia. Now, going back to the rabbis, we spoke already about Rabbi Isaac Alkalai and Rabbi Yehuda Alkalai. Another rabbi that will make his mark in Serbia was another rabbi named Rabbi Benjamin Hamvi. He was a great Sephardic rabbi. I think he was a rabbi of Larissa at one stage in time in Greece and Castoria in Greece. He would become most notably the rabbi of Belgrade in Serbia. Obviously, at the end of his days, I think he would become a public figure in Haifa, interesting enough. I think he lived 65 years of age. He passed away 100 years ago in 1925. He was eventually buried in the cemetery in Haifa, and he was very, very active in Belgrade, in the rabbinate facilities in of itself, and will do huge amounts of things. Let's explore a bit with regards to Rabbi Hamvi's life. I think he was born in Jerusalem in 1860, and I think Rabbi Moshe Hamvi, he was one of the leaders, let's just say, and he came from a family of Syrian heritage, from Aleppo, from Khalab, and great people in himself. I think he was educated in Khalab in himself, and he was friends with various different other great rabbis in the yeshiva. He would learn in the yeshiva, and while he was learning with Rabbi David Papo, Rabbi Eliyahu Moshe Haniziel, Rabbi Yitzchak Ashkenazi, various different great rabbis, he would go on as a Shochei Rabbanan, representing the Sephardic community of Jerusalem, He would travel to Greece, to Turkey, with those places. I think Greece was under Turkish control, and would serve as a rabbi, I think, for a few years over there also. He would return eventually to Jerusalem. And he was very close to Rabbi Abraham Ashkenazi, who was a Rishon LeZion at that point in time. And there was an official, let's say, Sephardic kollel in Jerusalem. And he would eventually arrive in Belgrade, which is talking about Serbia. And there was leaders over there who really wanted him to become the rabbi over there and a teacher. And he would take a position over there. And I think eventually he would return to Jerusalem. And he would eventually move to be in Greece for another window of time. But eventually he would move to Haifa in his last years. But he was also a head rabbi, which you have to point out, in Serbia. So that's very interesting. I think, actually, just to add on, Moshe, a great chronicler, historian, Moshe David Gaon, would actually chronicle and write a lot about him and about a lot of the famous rabbis, let's just say, about here, which we're speaking about in this series. I think he would have connections through marriage with the famous Rabbi Yaakov Chai Zurichen and other great people also. Another famous rabbi that would become a rabbi in Serbia at one window of time was another very famous Zionistic figure, someone named Rabbi Baruch Mitrani. I think he lived between the years 1847 to 1919. Another key Serbia rabbi at one stage in time. Remember, he was from many places. He was an educator, he was a poet, he was a sofer, he was a journalist, he was, you could say he was a Zionist also, and he was very well connected, I think, especially to Eliezer ben Yehuda. He's one of the, let's say, heroes of Zionism, you could say, especially even from a secular point of view, while being a rabbi also. He was an educator, and he made his mark in various different places. He himself, I think, was born in Kırıkkale, and he passed away in Edirne in Turkey. He was 72 years of age. He passed away in 1919, 106 years ago. But he would work in various places, including Jaffa, I think in Freshburg, in Kusha, in Istanbul, in Yombol, in Sofia, in Bulgaria, Yerushalayim, but he would also work in Serbia, I believe, at one point in time. So that he was another famous rabbi over there. I think it was around 1897. He would be in Edirne at that point in time in Turkey, and then he will go eventually, I think, to Belgrade. He will arrive in. And in Belgrade, he would work as an educator at one point in time. I think we're talking about late 1800s, maybe very early 1900s. He would work as an educator in Belgrade. He will be the head of a school, a Bet Sefer, for the Jewish community over there, and take on various different importances over there. And I think he was part of an aguda also over there, over there at that point in time. And he will be the manager of this Bet Sefer, let's just say. He was doing various different importances over there. I think it was around August, I think, in 1908, he suffered from illness, so that will make him, at that point in time, to go to Vienna. So I don't know, maybe he would have stayed in Belgrade for a longer point of time, but I'm not sure if he actually returned to Belgrade or not. But he was another rabbi that would become famous. He would have a window of time in Serbia as a prominent rabbi. Another rabbi over here, from famous rabbi from Serbia, was a rabbi named Rabbi Joseph Ibn Danon. I think another rabbi we've spoken about on various occasions before. He was a Hebraist, he was a Talmudist, he was a famous rabbi in the 17th century. He was born in Belgrade, actually. Obviously, it was part of the Ottoman Empire. He passed away in London, in the United Kingdom. He did, so we have to point that out over here. Much can be said with regards to him. I think, obviously, being born in Belgrade, he actually came from a Spanish Sephardic family, and they were settled there. I think they settled in Belgrade several generations before he was born there. He received a very strong education. He was a secretary to another rabbi we'll speak about in a minute, Rabbi Joseph Almos Nino, another famous Serbian Yugoslavian rabbi. I think during this period, Rabbi Ibn Danon collected Almos Nino's responsa, sermons, obituaries, and other writings in over 400 notebooks. When Belgrade was conquered by Maximilian II Emmanuel in September 1688, Rabbi Ibn Danon, along with much of the Jewish community, was exiled. For some time, he, along with his wife and son, Moses, lived a life in various Moravian towns, relying sometimes on assistance from the community, let's just say, itself. Probably, maybe there was anti-Semitism over there, I'm not too sure. But I think they first migrated to Nikolsburg with Rabbi Almosino, and from there, Kremsia and Prague. Eventually, they made their way to Amsterdam, where they received, I think, protection from Joseph ben Nathaniel Sarfati. He was brother-in-law of a printer, famous printer, Nathaniel Foer. And Rabbi Ibn Danon would devote himself to literary pursuits and wrote a work entitled Shlosha Sarigim, the three branches, in 1890. It was on three foundations upon which, according to Talmud in Avot, we learn about the world is based on din, law, worship, and charity. The first part, only the manuscript work with its preface, I think is still intact. And while he was in Amsterdam, he composed an index of the abbreviations found in Rabbi Hezkiah de Silva's famous pre-Chadash book, Halachic book, which is a commentary on the Code of Jewish Law, which you also have to point out also. At I think 1890, I think Rabbi Danon would settle in London and would serve as a teacher and assistant in Talmud Torah there, and would be there until he passed away. Now let's speak a bit about Rabbi Joseph Almosnino over here. We just spoke about him now. He was born in 1642, passed away in 1689. Another great rabbi from Yugoslavia. He was a rabbi, he was from a Spanish family, a renowned rabbi in Belgrade, and authored various different responsa. I think it was actually collected by his son Isaac, untitled Edut be Yosef, the Testimonies of Joseph, that was actually printed in Constantinople in 1711. So he was obviously from Salonika, I believe, originally. He was a son of Isaac and the grandson of Moses ben Baruch Almosnino. He would study in the academy of Rabbi Yaakov Hagiz in Jerusalem, and relocate to Belgrade in 1666, and would succeed his father-in-law as a chief rabbi in 1668 over there. He was another famous Belgrade rabbi. Rabbi Almosino's tenure, there was various different significant hardships. Devastating fire would occur over there that destroyed many of his writings, and the capture of the city of the Ottomans in 1688. In response to the crisis, he would travel to Germany. He would fundraise for the ransom of escaping Jews captured by Ottomans, and he passed away in Moravia, in Nikolsburg, I think in 1689 over there. Now, another famous rabbi was a rabbi of the name, I believe his name was Rabbi Morian Angel, I think his last name. I'm not so sure what his first name was. Rabbi Meir Angel, sorry. Or to give his full title, Rabbi Meir Abraham Angel. He was a rabbi from Belgrade. He was a Maggid, he was also known as, who lived in the 16th and 17th century. Very famous rabbi. He would actually be a famous rabbi in Sfat, in the land of Israel, and would be a traveler. He would travel to Poland, Italy, and Greece. He was the author of great books, including the Masoret Habarit, which was 700 homilios on texts, let's just say, strung together according to certain Masoretic lists. I think it was actually published in Krakow in 1619. He would write the book, the Masoret HaBrit HaGadol, which contained 1,650 homilies of the same character published at Mantua in 1622. Then there was a Keshet Nehusha, the bow of bronze, an ethical work in verse alternating with rimmed prose. In this work, he pictures a sort of moral combat in which the tendency to do ill is personified. This was published about the year 1593 near Constantinople by Reina over there, I believe at that point in time, the widow of Joseph Nasi. He also mentions commentary on Avot, which seems, I don't know if it was published or not, I don't think it was chronicled. So Rabbi Meir Angel was actually born in 1558 in Sofia. He passed away in 1613 in Sfat. So he was very much part of, but who was his rabbis? His rabbis included very great one, Rabbi Shmuel or Zida, Rabbi Chaim Vital, famous Rabbi Chaim Vital, Rabbi Yisrael Saruk, all rabbis who spoke about in the series of it. His Talmidim included the famous Rabbi Shlomo Al-Ghazi, and I think there will be a hesped, eulogy to him in his book, the Avat Olam, if I'm not mistaken. Also, we have to point out. Okay, so those were some of the great rabbis. There are more great rabbis also, which but we were able to speak about 7 or 8 of them. Let's go back to synagogues in Serbia to conclude. And some synagogues are still active, many of them are not. Many of them were destroyed at various points of time, and some of them were neglected, let's just say. So, including a famous synagogue was the Bet Israel synagogue. I think it was built around 1905. It was destroyed in 1941. It was also known as the Belgrade Sephardi synagogue, or the El Karavez synagogue. I think there was a blast in 1941 that would destroy it. Then there was the Belgrade Synagogue. That was, I think, around 1924. Obviously, we spoke about this at the onset, also known as Sukkot Shalom Synagogue, which is obviously a cultural monument as of 2013. I think the Chabad Synagogue in Serbia would open in 2008, which is standing currently. The El Kal Synagogue, which we spoke about also before, it was a 17th century synagogue. I think it would stand till 1941, and it was destroyed by the blast in 1941, unfortunately. Then the El Kal Nuovo Synagogue, which was built before 1886, I think it was destroyed in the 1910s, if I'm not mistaken. I think this was the El Kal Synagogue itself, also known as El Kal V'Juzul, was a Dorical synagogue, was a Sephardic synagogue in Belgrade, one of the oldest synagogues in the Balkans. Let's say a bit within regards to the history of this. I think it was the Jews of Belgrade. I think, obviously, as we stated before, the Jews of Belgrade will date all the way back to the 10th century. Obviously, we said on the outset how they would flee the Iberian Peninsula, and large numbers will flee to North Africa, to Europe. A significant amount obviously ended up in the Ottoman Empire at that point in time, and settled in the Balkans in the 16th century over there. Jewish community, as we stated before, was established around mid-16th century, and I think there was efforts through a Judah Lerma, I'm not sure his first name. Yeshiva was established in Belgrade in the 17th century. And so then the synagogue, I think, it's interesting, I think there were prohibitions at time periods of building prayer houses for the Jewish community. And the Jewish community was eventually granted a permit to build a synagogue in the 17th century, which is known by the locals as El Kal V'Juzul. It was reconstructed numerous times, I think, in its existence, especially in 1752. This was due to fires, I think, 1790, 1795 and 1806, with the last major reconstruction finished in 1819. And then I think the synagogue would remain mostly unchanged until being heavily damaged in the Second World War, and its demolition in the 1950s. I think in 2018, archaeologists uncovered foundations underneath a parking lot and dilapidated a basketball court, if I'm not mistaken. It is also said that there are remains of an even older synagogue, possibly from the 16th century, underneath the foundations of this building. However, the remains are unconfirmed. Now, other synagogues, I think, which we have to point out, there's a Batcho Tepolo synagogue in the North Baka district, the Bajmok synagogue, the Bajsa synagogue, the Feketik synagogue, Meli Idos synagogue, and the Pakir synagogue. Now, once again, I'm not too sure if all these synagogues I'm mentioning about follow the Sephardic or Ashkenazic stream, or maybe they weren't even Orthodox. Maybe I'm not sure if there were Reform synagogues or conservative synagogues there also. I'm just listing the synagogues. There's a Subbotiko synagogue over there, also most famously. Other synagogues included in North Banat district, the Adda synagogue, which I think was built in 1896. The Banatsko Ardelevo synagogue was built in 1880. The Horgo synagogue in 1910. The Kanjiza synagogue in 1861. The Kikinda synagogue, 1878-ish. Maratonos synagogue, 1880. Mokrin synagogue, 1876. The Mold synagogue, 1892. The Novi Knezevak synagogue in 1910. The Fadej synagogue in 1880. The Center synagogue in 1873. Over there. The Center Little synagogue, I think, was in 1928. The Stara Moravika synagogue, also afterwards. And especially in the South Baka district, there were synagogues. Bak synagogue, Baka Palanka synagogue in 1807. The Baki Petrovic synagogue in 1905. Bako Petrovo Selo Old Synagogue in 1854. Bako Petrovo Selo New Synagogue in 1905. I'm just listing some synagogues over here. I'm not giving much details on the synagogues itself per se. The Novi Sad Old Synagogue, 1826. The Novi Sad Synagogue of 1906, I think. The Salonika Synagogue. The Silba Synagogue in 1900. The Stari Begech Synagogue, 1883. Temarin Synagogue in 1878. The Title Synagogue in 1900. Tovareso Synagogue in 1900 also. I think in the South Banat district there was also the Bela Krivka Synagogue in 1898, and the Kovakia Synagogue was at one time, and the Belchka Synagogue, hope I pronounce this correct, in 1895. In the Baka district there was a Patian Synagogue, 1885. So there was a long list of synagogues in the 1800s, you can see. The Baki Brestovac Synagogue, the Bezdan Synagogue in 1807, the Konopidlija Synagogue in 1763. And the list goes on of the heritage it actually was. The Kula Synagogue, the Privjena synagogue, I think in 1880, Ratkovo synagogue in 1870, 1900 saw the Ritka synagogue, the Sivak synagogue in 1878, Somba Neolog synagogue 1865, the Somba Orthodox synagogue in 1925, Sonsa synagogue 1900. In the central Banat district there were synagogues, the Eka synagogue, the Melenki synagogue, Novi Bekech synagogue, Novo Miloseveho synagogue, the Sprisky Itebej synagogue, the Torak synagogue in 1870, Zren Janin synagogue 1894. I think in Belgrade district there was the Zerman synagogue, for example, in 1867. In the Nisava district, the Nis synagogue in 1925. In the Podovangela district there was the Smederevo synagogue in 1857. The Sumadija district, which was, I think, built, a synagogue was built in 1930 called the Krajuvek synagogue. And then in the Zajaka district, the Debelika synagogue before 1880. So very interesting. That's some synagogues that actually happen to have hailed from Serbia in of itself. So this was a historic video we did over here, talking about the history of Serbia culture, Serbia Jewish community, the rabbinic structure of modern day, of yesteryear, who were the great rabbis over there. There were many other rabbis and notable figures which you could mention. Also, this was just a few tidbits with regards to this. Now, friends, we're a community here. We learn over here on this channel about great rabbis of yesteryear. We explored different countries which had especially rich Sephardic culture and communities and synagogues. So please, everyone, subscribe to the channel and join it. We don't just do videos over here on great rabbis of yesteryear. We record videos on a daily tidbit of Daf Yomi, inspiration we do with great Jewish personalities of modern era, and so on and so forth. So wishing you well. Take care. Thanks for watching.